Okay, hey, welcome everybody to When in Romans. Once again, I'm Tim Rees here with Matt Barbero and Ed Anton from the Hampton Roads Church. And as we've said over and over again, we are going through the book of Romans, preaching through it verse by verse. This morning, we had the immense pleasure of hearing Tony Millet preach on the first 12 verses of Romans 7. Really, really difficult passage to really absorb as far as I'm concerned, because I find chapter 6 to be immensely powerful and sort of stake in the ground, forcing you to make choices and consider, this new life, this newness of life that chapter 6 says that we are into. And of course, later, chapter 8 is this monumental chapter that pretty much every reasonably biblically literate Christian is familiar with, where this walk by the Spirit and not by the flesh. And in between these two, you have this chapter 7, and in particular, the first part of chapter 7 that Tony was working on today, which I have to confess has always just been a little obscure to me. When we get into the second half of chapter 7, there's some things to wrestle with and argue with, but this first half of chapter 7, I've always kind of considered it one of those gloss over passages that I couldn't really get much out of. But Tony really hit it on the head this morning, and we're going to sort of recap that sermon, dissect it, and add whatever thoughts and questions that we find useful and edifying. So with that, Matt, would you read for us the first 12 verses of chapter 7?
Sure, and I'm reading from the ESV. Or do you not know, brothers, for I am speaking to those who know the law, that the law is binding on a person only as long as he lives? For a married woman is bound by law to her husband while he lives, but if her husband dies, she is released from the law of marriage. Accordingly, she will be called an adulteress if she lives with another man while her husband is still alive. But if her husband dies, she is free from that law. And if she marries another man, she is not an adulteress. Likewise, my brothers, you also have died to the law through the body of Christ, so that you may belong to another, to him who has been raised from the dead, in order that we may bear fruit for God. For while we were living in the flesh, our sinful passions aroused by the law were at work in our members to bear fruit for death. But now we are released from the law, having died to that which held us captive, so that we may serve in the new way of the Spirit and not in the old way of the written code. What shall we say then? What then shall we say? That the law is sin? By no means. Yet if it had not been for the law, I would not have known sin. For I would not have known what it is to covet if the law had not said, you shall not covet. But sin, seizing an opportunity through the commandment, produced in me all kinds of covetousness. For apart from the law, sin lies dead. I was once alive apart from the law, but when the commandment came, sin came alive and I died. The very commandment that promised life proved to be death to me. For sin, seizing an opportunity through the commandment, deceived me, and through it killed me. So the law is holy and the commandment is holy and righteous and good.
All right, thank you, Matt. It occurs to me as we read through this, I think about when we were in chapter 2 and in chapter 3, and Paul was making it a point to clarify that that we cannot be saved. We cannot find a righteousness in the law. The law is powerless to save. But here in chapter 7, he seems to want to circle back and kind of declare, now hold on a minute, lest you misunderstand me. I never said the law was a bad thing. I never said the law was anything but a holy thing. He makes that clarification here. And I thought that was very helpful. That's not an insight that jumped right out at me until I heard Tony preach it. Tony used this really cool metaphor about marriage. It kind of took it in a different direction than what Paul's illustration is here in the first paragraph. But it really helped sort of clarify this relationship to the law. Ed or Matt, would one of you guys like to kind of expound on that and dive into that and sort of share it here with our listeners?
Well, even before we do, just a little bit, there's an interesting use of the word law. I mean, I tried to highlight as Matt was reading. I think I read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, probably about 14 uses in these 12 verses of the word law. But it's interesting that it begins with, "For I'm speaking to those who know the law." So that, for sure, right? That is Jews that have become Christians. And it seems like that is for sure Torah law that seems to be in view, and that the Torah is binding on a person only as long as he lives. But then Paul starts to use law, I think, in a variety of ways. It'll become more evident in the second half of this chapter. But it says, "For a married woman is bound by law to her husband while he lives, but if her husband dies, she is released from the law of marriage," or laws concerning husbands, which almost seems like it's something other than the Torah, right? There's this like just the principles governing husbands, So law seems to find a way throughout this chapter to evolve into, that's just the way things work in this system. And if this is the system of a husband and wife, hey, this is the way things work. So it's interesting. You got the way things work in a husband-wife connection, and the way things work is you get one, and if you are not faithful to the one, then and you break that faith, then you're an adulteress. But there is a way for that adulteress, that scarlet A, to go away, and that is for the husband to die. And if the husband dies, it doesn't then take away the scarlet A. I don't think that's the way it works here. But if the husband dies and then she ends up joining to another husband, I think is the literal words used there. If she joins to another husband, then there is no scarlet A because of the death that was involved. And so it seems like death is the big thing that's in view here, not some analogy of marriage, but that death is the key, because it's the theme that took us out of chapter 6 and is bringing us now into 7. That's a little bit of it, but I know I didn't really do a good job of describing some of the metaphor that got expounded upon today. I don't know if Matt wants to try that. Or not, or good.
Well, I mean, I guess the question really becomes like, I mean, you were kind of hitting the nail on the head with like to define what they mean by law. Like, just, I think that's important. I mean, Tony said that it was the 613 commandments. Is that like a fair assessment when they say law in this chapter? Besides the marriage part, I mean, just the term law. Is that what you think he's referring to?
For now, but I mean, what are we going to do about the law of sin at the end of the chapter? Like,
I think in the law of my mind is
exactly.
is in,
Oh yeah. No, I'm just talking about like, sorry, for like, just for the verses that we read today, let's say through 1 through 12.
Okay, all right. Well, we'll confine it to that. Okay, fair enough.
So is that the 613? You think?
Seems to be just this oddity of adding a new wrinkle of, hey, here are the principles governing this system of marriage. That seems to, well, I mean, of course, it is governed by the 613, but it does seem to be set apart as, let me give you a metaphor here of law. And it's not the 613, it's this idea of marriage, which is governed by a law or a system of the way that it works. I don't know if that makes sense, because it is covered in the 613.
But then like later he's clearly right quoting the 10th commandment.
Yeah. And he says that the law is holy. And that's that. I think he's probably talking about Mosaic law when he says stuff like that.
Yeah.
So is it basically the 10 commandments pretty much essentially, and then also the other ones? But is that what he means when he says law? In far as these type of, these kind of, you die to the law kind of language, let's leave it at that type of we've died to the law. We're no longer under the law.
Sure. I'm good with that.
Okay.
Yep.
And then, yeah, I mean, I don't really have much to add with the whole marriage analogy. I mean, I think it's like you said, Ed, I think that it's definitely just hitting on the death part that was just discussed in Romans 6, and it's saying, hey, there's been a death, and now because of that death, things are never going to be the same again. You can't go back under the old system. You've crossed over now. And then they even talk about this serving in the way of the new way of the Spirit and not the old way of the written code. And Tony kind of hit on that too, with quoting Ezekiel and, getting the Spirit and the law written on our hearts.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like there's a new system now that we can't really go back to that old way.
I like this discussion of death in terms of how it plays into our salvation. At some point in the sermon, Matt, I can't remember exactly what Tony said or exactly the context, but he said something about the penalty for breaking the law was, and then you yell behind, you yelled out death.
Yeah.
But something that is, sometimes I'll just confess, sometimes I struggle with some of the different ways we describe the efficacy of Christ's death. And okay, it was a sacrifice, and it's a sacrifice for all sin. Okay. It was him dying in my place. Okay. I'll try to wrap my head around that sort of stuff. But when I think about having sin and having broken the law, so to speak, in my own flesh, the penalty for that being death, and then Christ dies, which is the penalty for my sin. But in Romans 6 and even into what we've been reading in 7, Paul tells me that I died too. So in some ways, I pay penalty with Christ. Christ invites me in to participate in this death with him.
Mm-hmm.
Not by no means suggesting that, not even trying to get anywhere close to I've somehow paid for my sins. No, but it, and how can I be held accountable for the sin? For sin, I'm dead. That person is dead. I died with Christ in baptism. That's a metaphor that I can kind of get my head around pretty easily.
I think also, Tim, when you're saying that this is like flyover territory or gloss over territory, probably because we're not so bound up in our own consciences with the law. I mean, there are certain laws that do kind of mess with our conscience. But chapter 6 seemed to be devoid of any of that, right? Chapter 6 was just, there is a death in Christ, there's a death in you, there's a new life in Christ, there's a new life in you. You went from a slave to sin to a slave of right? So there's this universality of chapter 6 that speaks rather readily to anybody, especially to us who are Gentiles.
Right.
And chapter 8 will feel like that too. And now Paul, I think before he maybe even Paul's thinking, hey, before I get too far along here, let me make sure that I'm carrying along everybody, because part of my task in this letter is to unite the Jewish Christians with the Gentile Christians and to smooth over the awkwardness of them being taken away, grafted back in. And so let me make sure that everything that I was talking about in chapter 6 can have a bit of an application with law now in view. And that the death of chapter 6 can also be seen as a death to the law for those that are under the law.
Right.
So I guess the question really becomes too, is like, what is the person who's not a believer in God, like, what law are they under then? Like, you know what I mean? Like, in the sense that, like, because Tony was saying like that we can't really relate to it because we were never under the law, and I know that sometimes we say that too, like, oh yeah, we were never under the law, but like, it does seem like God kind of holds people to some type of law anyway, and it might be different. I'm not sure, like, obviously if you're in Christ or out of Christ, but like he's holding them according to something. like, so what is the status? What was our status, rather, I should ask us, before we were baptized? Like, how was the law applicable to us, would you say?
Well, I think we go back to chapters 1 and 2, where it talks about that we showed that the law was already written on our hearts. And that we, just by the experience of the way that the world works, already have a concept that there is right and wrong, and that there is a moral compass, even in creation itself, even in the imago Dei of ourselves. We've got some bit of a moral compass that's there, and that in itself is enough to convict us.
Okay, so just violation of conscience, basically. And then the law kind of guides you to that, like, meaning, like, if we read the law, it still convicts us, even if we weren't under it.
Yeah, maybe we had a bit of a nagging feeling, and then we started to realize with greater clarity what is a perfect alignment with the will of God, what is radical misalignment. And that was probably my experience as I came to a place of needing to receive grace. As I began to seek God, the law helped to spring to life my utter sinfulness, which we'll get to in the later part of this chapter. And it was super helpful, where I kind of went along thinking I'm kind of a good guy. Now I'm like, whoa, no. I get to see just how far afield I am from this great God and this amazing Jesus. And the Spirit is the one bringing that conviction to me.
That's interesting.
Yeah, with the specificity of the word, but also of just with convicting me of sin, righteousness, and judgment. John 16:8. That's
very interesting. So do you think it's almost like not even applicable to non-Jews, this chapter, then? Like, does it have no meaning, or does it? Because when he says, like how you said, Ed, how he said he's just speaking to those who know the laws, it almost like have no bearing, like, to the Gentile at that time, or like.
Yeah, I mean,
we have the Bible, now, but they didn't have that
sure.
even then, right?
Well, I mean, certain things like verse 6, but now we are released from the law, having died to that which held us captive, so that we serve in the new way of the Spirit and not in the old way of the written code. Well, sure. I mean, there's some parts of that kind of speak to us, because we did have a written code of some sort, right? We had an understanding of, you know what, you don't cut in front of me like that. You don't lie. There was enough going on there.
That's interesting.
And even, well, I guess two things I would point out is that the audience of even the Gentile converts by now would have been reading the Old Testament, what we call the Old Testament.
Okay.
Quite a bit, yeah.
And while they may not have, while they could say, well, we had no idea, but they would now be convicted of it, I think.
Wow.
And then, of course, there and not telling you guys anything you don't know, but there is sin in the Old Testament before the Mosaic Law, obviously. So there's this, I think
There's justification, right? Justification for it too.
Yeah. So, I think that the Greeks and the Romans and the barbarians would have all come from traditions of honor, and this is right and this is wrong, and everybody with an honest view of themselves would say, yeah, I've fallen short of whatever code I thought I was supposed to be following. I didn't live up to it.
That's very interesting. And also, it actually does say, too, it says, I'm speaking to those who know the law. So it doesn't say I'm speaking to those who are under the law or anything like that. So you could know the law, or who were under the law, but you could know the law, and you probably would know the law. So there's almost this idea that what you're saying is just hearing God's revealed word in and of itself is a conviction.
Yeah.
Which they were getting then with the Old Testament, and we're getting now with the whole Bible.
Yeah.
So what do you think about with Tony's point today? It seemed like a big point of his was that, like, the big transition here is that you no longer have to fear the consequence. What do you guys think about that when he was suggesting that?
I think a Jewish Christian need not fear that consequence. But there's still the law of Christ, law of the Spirit. Those are, the fear of the Lord is a pretty terrific thing, right? We just took a tour of Proverbs, and Proverbs 1-8 really make it abundantly clear how wonderfully beautiful the fear of the Lord is, and it does produce freedom in us, because it is an edifice that helps protect us from the enslavement to sin. So it's pretty terrific. I know that we often like to look at 1 John, where it says perfect love drives out fear. There is no fear in love. But it also is preceded by, this is love for God, to obey his commandments. And his commands are not burdensome. It could be the case that perfect love also equals perfect obedience, right? This is love for God, to obey his commands.
Oh, that's interesting.
And if you are now perfectly aligned with God, enthralled and living and driving 55, you don't fear the policeman on the road, because you're already aligned. It's already done its work. But that perfect obedience is a product of perfect love, and brings us to that place of having no need for fear.
Wow.
But when we decide to bag obedience, well, then I think fear plays a pretty good role. Because, but I mean, especially in the Bible, because it's about you don't abuse the marginalized,
right?
The alien, the orphan, the widow. They all get special consideration because they all have a big dad looking over them. Otherwise, people would take advantage.
And sin still has its consequences. In chapter 8, not to jump ahead of us, but when Paul is clearly talking to what we would call saved Christians, whether Jew or Gentile, he says in verse 13, for if you, to the Jewish and Gentile Christians, he says, for if you live according to the flesh, you will die. And I don't know, I don't claim to know exactly what that means. But sometimes I think we act as though, okay, well, now before I was baptized, my sin had consequences. But now that I'm baptized, somehow my sin doesn't have consequences. It's all wrapped up in this salvation thing. But I mean, if I pull out a gun and shoot Ed, can I be forgiven? Well, okay, fine. But I mean, his wife is still a widow. His kids are still orphans. The effects of the sin are real, and they're not something that we as people who call themselves followers of Jesus, these are things that should be horrifying to us, that we would be involved in some deeds of the flesh that lead to death. So I am, and perhaps I'm just too much there. There's just a little bit of a fundamentalist strain in me that gets a little scared when we start talking in ways that would suggest, I'm a Christian now, so the consequences of my actions are no longer real, when clearly they are.
Yeah, amen. And for sure, we're baptized into a great sacrifice, a perfect sacrifice. We're not baptized over and over again. There's an ongoing cleansing, praise God, of having been washed, sanctified, justified. But nonetheless, we we are in we're in a gifting cycle, as I like to remind us all of, and to break that gifting cycle is, a great horror to anyone that understands the depth of grace. Like we've just been given such an amazing gift. It now throws us into a cycle of gratitude and generosity. And for that cycle to be anything other than that would leave anyone aghast to see it. And such an aberration from that ought to be then quickly moderated with repentance back into the gifting cycle that grace offers us. We get to live in that ecosystem. Who wants to jump out of that?
Another thing that I noticed today was with both the communion message and the sermon, there seemed to be this theme permeating of, almost like trying to avoid perfectionism, and that the standard, is a little bit less than perfect. It was mainly in the communion message, but Tony also kind of echoed it. But like, do you guys necessarily agree with that? Is that even correct in the sense that like, I don't know, like, I mean, I kind of go back and forth, but it seems to me like the standard is still absolute perfection, right? In the sense that it's not like God's like, look, you just have to kind of do pretty well and I'll, right? Like, like now at the same time, of course, we're not going to be perfect, but doesn't God still expect us to be perfect?
Sure, right? Be holy as I am holy.
Be perfect as your Father in heaven is
holiness,
perfect.
not perfection, right? 1 Peter 1:13, I think. So should we strive for holiness minus X? And what is X? Like what is that amount of unholiness that we are suddenly, we've become acculturated to a certain level of unholiness.
Yeah, I think
like a God forbid moment for Paul. But go ahead, yeah.
No, I just think that it's. I think the problem is that we take every question and every topic, and we just want to frame it in heaven or hell. Heaven or hell. And it's like, okay, somebody says something like for perfection, and the first question on our mind is, well, am I going to go to hell if I'm not perfect? And if the answer is, well, no, you're not going to go to hell if you're not perfect, then I think the American in us is like, oh, well, then I don't care. I'm not worried. And I just don't think that's what was going on in the New Testament. I mean, I really think Paul and Jesus, for that matter, you take the Sermon on the Mount, I really think that he was calling us to, be concerned with now as well as later. And, it's just, just imagine if every time your wife asked you to do something, or every time your wife asked you to change, or every time your wife asked you to improve, you just said, well, are you going to divorce me if I don't do it? I mean, but that's how we kind of treat God. It's like, well, am I still coming to heaven? Okay, good. Then I'm going to go back and, do my sin thing again, because I'm covered with grace. And I just think I think that's why the church is weak. I mean, and I'm not talking about our church. I mean, the church, I think the modern church is just this place that people look at and say, why? What's going on there? Other than some story about heaven and hell, what do you got for me? I don't see transformed lives. I don't see people. I don't see lights of the world. I don't see salt of the earth. And I think again, we just always want it heaven or hell. That's all I want to talk about. And I don't know what's in play here. I think there's a lot more going on here than that.
Amen. Hey, let me. That was super helpful, by the way. The marriage analogy too. There's times where we end up with the personification of sin, right? Sin is crouching at the door from Genesis, and now we have it in verse 11. For sin, seizing an opportunity through the commandment, deceived me and killed me. It killed me, right? So that's some pretty good personification right there. What do you think about that? Do you think that that's poetic language throughout the Bible? Do you think that sin is some sort of a entity bigger than just the action that occurred?
I personally think he's, and this might be just totally out there, but the more and more I think about this concept, I do think that he might be just referring to Satan. I mean, what do you think about that? You think that's possible? It seems like he's almost just talking about the devil himself when he speaks in that manner. So I don't know what else it could be, you know, like in the Genesis 4 also. I mean, if it is if he's personifying it in a real way, I don't see it being some other demon, right? It almost just seems like it would be Satan himself.
Yeah.
We also get it in Romans 5. Sin entered through one man and reigned like a
Yeah. And we're a slave to sin, right? In 6. Yeah. Yeah.
And it does say, and forgive me for not being able to cite it, but we do have a New Testament passage that refers to Satan as the ruler of this world, I believe, right? John, book of John.
Yeah.
What do you think about that, Ed? You think that's a possibility?
I think it could be. I mean, maybe it would be more like deliver us from evil, the evil one, Paniras. We get the word for sin, right? Harmatia here, missing the mark. It's interesting. Once you have the law in view, it's usually transgression. The word transgression more than sin, but we've got sin and we've got to personify it. I don't know. I think maybe we've got to recognize that this is a bigger deal than we think, and then the sinful nature itself too, something we're going to have to grapple with a bit, and it'll be coming our way in 8 a bit, and even at the end of 7, we'll get the flesh sarks and what to do about all that. I mean, we get it here too, right? Don't we get or is that later? The law of
we get
sin and flesh.
For while we were living in the flesh, our passions aroused by the law were at work in our members.
Yeah.
Verse 5.
There's some sort of a partnership handshake dance, right, between the flesh and sin. This personification of sin, you know, shaking hands with us in the flesh, and plotting and scheming and enjoying.
Oh yeah, I thought something else Tony said was interesting. Sorry, now just things are just popping into my head, like from the sermon. But what did you guys think about when he said that we didn't have a choice before with sinning, and then he was saying that sort of now this gives us the choice, the real ability to not sin. What do you guys think about that?
Well, I mean, I don't know if he used choice, but maybe more the idea of being compelled, right? So when we're in the flesh.
Yeah, or let me rephrase it. Let me rephrase it, Ed. You're right, actually. Let me just say that I think he said now this gives us the power to resist sin properly.
Yeah, we can speak of our own life experience, right? Of course, of how many times I wanted to be able to rid myself of whatever that might have been: alcohol, deceit, lust, porn, you pick it, and I went nowhere with it. While in the realm of the flesh, while a slave to sin. But am I having the same battle that I had then? No, for sure, no. I mean, is there perfectionism? Well, no, but it ain't nothing like the way that it was.
Right.
I'm definitely not a slave to it. I'm definitely not under the dominion of it.
And you know, this idea of the Spirit, a passage that's always been very convicting to me in Galatians 5:16, it says, walk by the Spirit and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. And, you know, so I guess the argument that, you know, maybe behind what Tony was saying is that, you know, devoid of the Spirit, there is no Spirit to walk by. So we're only left with gratifying the flesh. We're only left with self-service.
Yeah.
And
I mean, that's almost verse 6 here, isn't it? That having died to that which held us captive, so that we may serve in the new way of the Spirit. So we have died. And what is it that held us captive? It's not just the law that held us captive, really. It was sin using the opportunity, sinful passions aroused by the law. But it was sinful passions that ruined everything, not the law.
Oh, yeah. And that was like in James, remember when he's like, isn't it your passions like warring among
yourselves? What causes quarrels among you, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a kind of that's just within us almost, right? Those passions, that's not even.
Oh yeah, still for them as Christians.
Right, right. Yeah, we were talking about that, Tim. Remember the other night we were saying that.
Yeah.
You know, it's an interesting phrase. I think we're all probably looking at ESV is the end of verse 8. For apart from the law, sin lies dead. It almost makes it sound like it's a sea monkey that lies dormant until you put it in water. Remember you would get those as a kid?
Matt doesn't know what a sea monkey is.
Yes, I do. I used to have them when I was a child too.
Oh, wow. I didn't know they made it that long.
For apart from the law, sin lies dead. And maybe I'm reading dormant into that, but the commandment came into view, sin sprang to life, and I died.
Oh, yeah. So what do you think Paul's talking about there? Like in the sense that, do you think he's talking about when he's a kid or something like that? Or
yeah.
Is he talking about Adam and Eve, or is he just talking about maybe just a general humanity? As far as this idea of being, alive without the law, and then.
Well, that's good because this will lead us into autobiographical stuff next week.
Yeah.
When we get into the chapter, right? I was once alive, I want to do right, but then I do bad. I think it is him, but I think it is him really doing his best to be a Hebrew of Hebrews, faultless, righteous, giving it his all.
So verse 9, you're saying, was that be him as like a child or him before he learned Torah or something?
That could be interesting. Maybe it was as he became, bar mitzvah, a son of Torah.
Right. Aware. Yeah, as he became aware.
Yeah, that's the moment of bar mitzvah, verse 9. Maybe he did grow as a man, and his, he grew in grace and stature, as men do as they study Torah. Maybe he did do better. Maybe that's why he's able to write what he writes in Philippians about himself.
And then he's talking about a progression, I guess, then, right, of sin in his life.
Yeah. Yeah, so he did have a desire to do good, right? He wasn't one that was so compelled or was so under the yoke or wasn't held captive by sin or a slave to sin. The end of 7, he actually did desire to do right. Maybe that was his own maturing in the Torah. But I guess we'll talk about that next week. Chew all that up. But for right now, yeah, I think we got some compelling thoughts about sin itself. The law is pretty clear. I think we've talked about it a few times, right? The law is good. It just makes us more aware, shines a light, magnifying glass.
Oh yeah, I guess here's a good question. What do you think sin, what do you think they mean by sin when it's not personified in this chapter here?
So my straightforward thought would be an action on my part, or a thought, or an activity on my part that is against the will of God.
Okay.
As we talk about this, it just reminds me of the garden, and it was at the moment of being enlightened to good and evil, the knowledge of good and evil upon eating the fruit, that this fall takes place, and Adam and Eve begin walking the path of death. At that point, if you eat of this tree, you will die. And then And then here we find ourselves talking about the law, which is sort of equally enlightening, but it has no power to save. It shows us our sin, and it can call us higher, but we're still dying under the law. It's only Christ and the Spirit that restores us to Eden, that restores us to a hope of life. And I kind of see that work here a little bit.
Yeah, amen.
I was just thinking out loud too with Ed, when you were saying with the sin, that it's something that we do too. I was thinking how it says that our sinful passions aroused by the law were at work in our members, to bear fruit for death. So it's the body, really, it's something that we're doing. Like,
Yeah.
Tim, also, not to keep referring to our conversation last week, but we were saying that there's a difference. It's worse when you actually do something, right? With your hands, with your eyes, with your body. I mean, God personifies the body as very wicked, right? With the different body parts. So it seems like it is some real action of transgressing with the body.
Yeah, no question. Not to get too cerebral with it, but or to try to mince it out and hierarch things, but when the sin in your when the evil thoughts of your heart manifest in your hands and your feet and your mouth, that's when community gets damaged. That's when marriages get damaged, friendships get broken, churches have divisions. Not saying that it's okay to have evil thoughts in your heart that you just don't let to your hands, but no, and Ed, just not to be cryptic, what we were kind of talking about was, that as we struggle with our sin, where can we point to victories to encourage ourselves with? And, when we stop short of the full fruition of sin as it tries to kind of manifest itself from the heart to the feet, and that, while the ultimate goal is to not have those thoughts in the first place, the fact that those thoughts were taken captive and prevented from being given vent in our members is something that we should be celebrating.
Amen. Yeah, that's great. Well, amen. So I think we get law pretty straightforward for the most part as being Torah here. I think we're going to see it coming about in a lot of different ways as the chapter ends. I think we get sin in a way that we're understanding, but just also a bit of a kind of a cool spookiness of sin being a bit bigger than just the actions that we take. So that's kind of cool. And Spirit is here right before Paul goes into the autobiographical stuff, which makes me think that it's all prior to his conversion, right? So we end with the Spirit in 6, that now we serve in the new way of the Spirit, not in the old way of written code. So we're getting a lot of the same stuff, but it seems to be packaged in a way for the Jews. So, amen. I mean, maybe we're just meant to be, if we were in Rome as Gentile Christians, we're just meant to be like, hey, you know what? Good on you guys. We bumped into this as ones that tend to excuse our sins, whereas you came into this as ones who are having a heavy burden of accused the law of your sin. But you made it too. We all made it. Come on, we're together in the new way of the Spirit. And maybe as Gentiles, if we were there at the time, or if we had a bunch of Jewish Christians as brothers and sisters, that would also be a bonding thing for us. But again, otherwise, maybe a little bit of a chapter that doesn't kind of get cross-stitched onto our into our picture frames and hung up on the walls.
Hey Ed, I noticed just 2 other things that are kind of interwoven together, but I like Tony's point today, how he was saying that like you're either serving sin or you're serving God. Like there's no in between. Like whatever you're doing, you're either like using your members to serve sin, or for God. And it's like that black and white. And then even with here too, it seems like, and Tony may have said this, or I'm just noticing it now, I'm not sure, I don't remember, but it's like you're bearing fruit too, one way or the other. You're always bearing something. It's like you're either bearing fruit for death or fruit for God. So it really is just so black and white at the end of the day. And we try to make it so gray. You know, it's either whatever you do, it's either pleasing to God and you're bearing fruit to God, or you're bearing fruit for death. And I was just wondering, well, first of all, what do you think what do you think about that idea with the contrast?
Well, yeah, I mean, didn't we get it in spades in chapter 6, right? It came real hard on us. Like it was just almost a chapter of contrast from start to finish. And then we're gonna get it again, but now with a whole lot of spirit in chapter 8. I think here this just like plays down the contrast on the negative side a lot more, right? It just kind of explains how deep and dark the sin side of the contrast is here, and how the law can help those under the law to be that much more convicted and desperately needing grace and getting it and getting the spirit on top of that and being justified finally, but not by the law, but by Christ.
I think it's very convicting to think of serving sin or serving.
Ooh, yeah, sounds ugly.
Righteousness in so much. I mean, and I don't think it's too much of a stretch that, you know, like if we think we're bearing fruit for God, whether it be, you know, helping people to be converted to Christianity, or even if you just think of it in terms of bearing the fruit of the Spirit, gentleness and kindness and love, patience, you know, we can say that, well, as we do those things in our service to the Spirit, we're making the world a better place in some small or large way. In the same way, if we're serving sin, we're making the world a worse place.
Wow.
You know, our workplace is not as good as it could have been had you not sinned there today. Your marriage, your children, the children that we are raising would have been better off had I not sinned against them today.
Oh wow.
You know, there's consequences. We're serving two warring factions, you know, righteousness and sin, and you know, we're kind of advancing the cause of one or the other.
Yeah, amen. And those are great practical applications out of all of this. But again, it is a chapter that doesn't give us that kind of clear of a marching order, right? It just gives us kind of the genesis of how sin and the law and Christ all kind of work together in ways that are a little bit arm's length from us, but nonetheless brilliant in redemptive history. So I don't know. Anything else we got on this, or are we a bit tapped out on the beginning of Romans 7 and for those under the law?
I think we did give it a good run for the 12 verses that it is, and set us up right for next, which will be a very lively discussion.
Yeah, I know. This is the calm before the storm. And then we have another bunch of storms.
You got to get a fourth person in on this one next week, an opposing view, because we're all too like-minded on it. So
yes, who we grab for sure. So very, very cool. Well, amen. Love you guys. I guess we'll call it a night.
Thanks, guys.
Okay.